Hi guys. So yeah, CSS Life Lessons. So first things first. Uh, well, who is this guy? Who am I? My name is Kurtis Bradley. I'm a full stack web developer at thehousedesigners.com. We sell house plans. We have those distributed over. We have some on Walmart. We have some on a few of our different sites. We partnered with This Old House, Better Homes and Gardens. We sell those house plans from different designers around the country on those sites. Pretty much we maintain a huge database and we provide a fancy UI and website for the designers to use and our clients to use, or the customers to use. That's what I do for work. I started coding when I was 12 years old. Actually, a 9-year-old who was just one of my friends taught me how to build websites. And back then it was just HTML4 and CSS2. And it was horrible. Like every website was built with tables, and every type of formatting you wanted to do, anything you had to do within a super strict. I'm sure it wasn't nearly as bad as CSS1, but it was super strict compared to CSS3, which you guys have now. So yeah, I started coding when I was 12. I built all sorts of different projects, sort of a jack of some code, I like to say, because I don't know, every programming language, but I definitely worked on quite a few. I built some video games. I've used Unity 3D. I built some interactive apps, and a lot of custom web systems. A lot of my background has just been self-taught. Until I came to the Tech Academy in 2018. It was a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of things that I wish I would have done sooner. One thing I will say is there's really never a time when it's too soon to do something. Even starting looking for work, I think the one thing that I learned, the biggest thing that I learned from just going so many years without having a mentor is that like everybody needs a mentor. Like even if it's one of your peers, like peer mentoring, that's great. Just get somebody else to look at your code. That's like the one thing I will say, like right off the bat, is like it doesn't just have to do with CSS. Like it doesn't just have to do with one language. Like any language, doesn't matter. If you're programming, get somebody else to look at your code, because different people have different ideas. Different people have different ways of doing things. Even if you're all working the same language, 50 people have 50 different perspectives. So, introduction to CSS. Who here knows what CSS is? Okay, so do any of you feel a little bit like this as far as CSS goes? Yeah, it's just sometimes it can just kind of feel like a mess. It just gets worse and worse and worse as it goes on, and yeah, eventually you just scrap it all together. Yeah, so that's kind of how I felt about CSS when I first started. It was, there was a lot of tables. It was hard to make the tables do anything because the tables were HTML, and I was like, well, how does CSS interact with this, other system? And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about, what is CSS and why do I love it now? What does CSS have to teach us about writing good code and getting a job? How can we use code to further our career and stay passionate? And how do you center in CSS? Seriously though, if you do figure that out, please come tell me how to do that, because it's a nightmare. So, what is CSS and why do I love it? Like I stated, I did not like it when I first started using it. So what made me fall in love with it? Well, as you guys know, everybody raised their hand here. CSS is a styling language, and when I first started using it, I thought of it more as as like a tool to manipulate HTML. But I thought of it. I mean, that's what it is. But I thought of it more in the way of like, oh, this is its own separate language, because I really had very little experience with programming languages. And so really when I first started, I thought HTML and CSS were programming languages. They're not. They don't really do much. They're, CSS is just for styling. HTML is just for blocking out stuff. So yeah, CSS is a styling language. Once I understood that and I started using it as a styling language, what it was meant for, I started falling in love with it because it is so good at styling things. It's so good at doing what even other languages can do. It can also do them, especially now with CSS3. You can use animations, and animations increase what you can do with styling by it's just exponentially better. So CSS can be used solo or paired, meaning that it can be used by itself to create things. This last week, which I'll show you in a little bit, I challenged myself to just make stuff with CSS, just pure CSS, and I made a lot of really cool things. But it also can be paired with things, so it's actually really powerful when it's paired with JavaScript. That's mostly how it's used in professional, like the actual industry. It's mostly used with JavaScript. It's manipulated a lot with JavaScript, and it can definitely be powerful both ways. It really depends on what you want to build and if you want it to be, how you want it to be interactive. If you want it to be functional, the styling, then definitely it needs to be used with JavaScript. That's not to say that you can't use it without JavaScript if you want it to be functional, because I have done that before. It's very difficult, but you can do it. But for powerful graphics, it's both lightweight and can be used solo, and it's very powerful when used as such. CSS is accessible and easy. This is one of the reasons I fell in love with it. Once I understood that CSS was a styling language and that's what it should be used for, I realized how accessible and easy it really was. You could change the background color of any individual element just by saying background color, whatever color you want. You could even type it in plain English, or you can type it in I call it HTML code. It's hexadecimal, but yeah, it really is accessible and easy to use once you understand the fundamentals of it. So CSS allows a creative approach. This is another reason I fell in love with it, and one of the reasons I use it today, even after working for 10 years now in programming, I still come back to CSS because it allows me to easily and quickly iterate on something. If I want a certain type of graphic, or I know I'm going to build something with data that's on the back end, and I want to be able to pull it and put it somewhere on the front end, I can iterate and not have to set up databases, set up a whole new site, whatever it is. I can just iterate on it with CSS, and it's super easy. It's you can do it with any computer. The computer does it. It could literally be a potato, and you could still run CSS and quickly create what you wanted because it's so straightforward. It's not limited by frameworks, or there's no extra setup. It's just if you have HTML, you have a tag in HTML, you can build whatever you want in CSS, and it can be used almost completely by itself as long as you just have a teeny bit of HTML. Yeah, I'm sure you're already done hearing me say CSS. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've done this. How I've just put these principles to use, and I spent the last week actually. Once I knew that I was going to give this talk, I went and I thought about it for a while. I was like, well, how can I put these principles into practice and show how just by applying yourself, you can get good at something. Find your little corner. Not have to say well, okay, because I only know JavaScript, CSS must be whatever. Or for me, it was because I only know CSS, I was so scared of JavaScript. And now I work with JavaScript every day. I mean, that's like the majority of what I do, I code in JavaScript. So for me, it was, okay, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to create something just in CSS to show that you can create something every single day. And I did. For 7 days, I created loading screens, and I'll show you those as we go on. I created loading screens just out of pure CSS with animations. just to kind of show like you can create, and you can start creating now with whatever it is, and whatever programming language you guys want to jump into, go do it. Like don't wait for like to finish a book about it to go start. Like just go start. Make a bunch of mistakes. For 4 years, I didn't jump into JavaScript because of CSS. I was so comfortable in CSS that I chose not to. I chose not to expose myself to JavaScript, and it actually it really crippled me for a while. Like I could have gotten a job way sooner if I had dove into JavaScript and really learned how to use it. And so these little examples of just little loading screens in CSS are just a practical way you can go and create something. This is, again, one of the reasons I love CSS is because this is how I got my job. Is I created things like this. The job that I have now, this is why this is how I got it. I was just telling somebody that I started out as a UI and UX person at this job, and now I'm a full stack developer, and that happened over the course of 10 months. So because I started out showing them this is what I can do with CSS, and really I went into the interview. It was a pretty informal interview, but they had an issue with their little hamburger, their little drop down for their mobile menu, and they're like, why isn't this working? And I recognized the problem because I had done it on my own and run into that same problem hundreds of times over the last 6 years. I recognized the problem, and I opened up the console and I changed one value, and it fixed their problem. But the only reason I was able to recognize that was not because I had read a bunch of books. It's not because I had been to a bunch of classes. It's because I had taken what I had learned from those classes or lessons or whatever, and I had just gone and done it myself. There's something I've been thinking about recently, and some of my friends have said, they're like, a CEO doesn't just get out of college and become a CEO. Like maybe a few do, but for the most part, it's like you have to go out and you have to do it yourself to get hired as a CEO. Most of the CEOs today, it's like they're not going to get hired as a CEO somewhere else unless they were already a CEO. Unless they're already practicing it, unless they're already practicing leading. You can't just read a book and be like, okay, I know how to lead now. It's a practice, and it's the same thing with any coding language. And I'm using CSS as an example because it's super easy to illustrate that. But there's all these little creations, created one every day. It's classic Microsoft loading bar. But these were all just created in pure CSS, and it took me 15 minutes because that's where you get to once you just start applying yourself and pushing towards it. And really, that's how you get a job. It's not I'm going to go to these interviews, I'm going to be super prepared. It's find the place that you thrive. Find the place that you really are interested in. That you're passionate about. I'm passionate about CSS because I have these little ideas, and I can go and I can create them in 15 minutes. And I wanted to do that, and so I would go and I would do this. It used to take me, it used to take me 3 weeks to create something like this. Now it takes me 15 minutes, and I did it once a day for 7 days just to show this is where you get. And I didn't have any formal training. When I came to the Tech Academy, I was kind of coming to fill out the rest of I'll fill in the places where I didn't know that much. And so I actually just skipped over the CSS and HTML section because I was like, okay, I need to get to the part where I really don't know what I'm doing, which was mostly JavaScript. And if I had not been afraid of just jumping into JavaScript like I did with CSS, I would have actually been able to be confident enough to just be, okay, I've jumped into something uncomfortable, I've learned it, and now I'm going to move on to something else. A lot of people get in these arguments of that I used to do with CSS. I used to be like, well, yeah, JavaScript is whatever. And it's kind of ridiculous because when people go to look for candidates for a job, they're not looking for, in my case, they're not looking for someone who can create loading bars. I created a lot of loading bars, whatever. It doesn't matter. They're looking for someone who can learn. Someone who, when given a challenge, they'll go and they'll accomplish whatever it is that they've been challenged to do. And they'll give you parameters of okay, you need to use this language, you need to use whatever. But true programmers, they're not people who work in a specific language. You can specialize in that language, and I would encourage you to specialize in a language, multiple languages. But programmers, what really programs are is problem solvers. And that's what we are as programmers, and that's how we how we get jobs is we know how to solve problems in ways that other people don't. There's a saying that's like a programmer is somebody who solves a problem you didn't know you had in a way you don't understand. It's like that's exactly what we do. We find those creative ways to solve problems. And for me, it was like the reason I did this is because this is solving a problem. I had to create a loading bar every single day, and I had to create a new one. I had to come up with an idea. I had to bring it to creation. And I did, but the only reason, the only way I could do that is because I trained myself over years. I made a lot of mistakes, but I trained myself over years to go and, have an idea, just start somewhere. With a lot of these animations, actually, especially this one, I had been doing it a certain way where I had taken one object and I had made multiple versions of that animation, and I had animated that one object a bunch of times. But this one, I needed to turn the entire object over, and I was like, well, how am I going to do this? And I was like, man, I really don't know how I'm going to turn the object over, because there was like this whole parentage thing, and it was just a huge mess. And I was like, well, how am I going to do it? And I was like, wait a jiffy. I was like, I've got a whole container above this one that's holding it all in place, like holding it in the center. I was like, I could just duplicate the parent above it. So even, like I was literally learning things this last week creating this. And like I've been doing this for 10 years. But like that is what a programmer does, is they figure out how to solve the problem at hand. And you can only be so prepared for that problem. So for you guys like who are looking for jobs, I assume some of you are, in this course looking for a job. I would say definitely don't limit yourself to just reading about it or just doing one program. As you go through the Python, as you go through the C#, as you go through whatever course, whatever you're learning, however you're learning it, I would say apply yourself. Have a kind of goal. Keep it pretty simple, but like start somewhere. This is what they teach a lot in with game development. They teach, especially for like indie developers, they teach just do something. Just create a game. It can be Pong. Like you should probably start with like that. And it's like I would encourage you guys. Like I would encourage anyone who's getting into tech to just create something. And it doesn't matter how simple. It doesn't matter how much you don't know, because for me, I had a lot of it was anxiety, but it was also this idea that I was like, oh, I wasn't good enough to have this job, But when it came to the Tech Academy, it was like the curriculum was laid out in such a way that it was like, oh, this isn't about it's not about the curriculum. It's about the principles that we learn in this curriculum and how we get to whatever place it is that we're like, okay, now we're going to go and have this interview, and the interview is not about how much code we know. It's about how we can solve problems. And actually, most interviews, with talking with interviewers, what they say about interviews is they're not looking for you to solve the problem. They're looking for you to have a creative solution. To have a way to solve the problem, not to solve the problem right there. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to know how to take the next step. And so if you learn that as a programmer, you learn just how to take the next step, how to have the discipline to set a goal and just code towards that goal and meet the goal. Even if you fail along the way, like that's a success because you set the goal and you started coding towards it. And like that's what progress looks like as far as coding goes. So for me, it was a lot of this like back and forth. There's this piece of history that we don't really talk about, even though it was super recent, the .com bubble. And there were a lot of programmers who kind of got their origins in the .com bubble. They were just normal people who had no coding experience or very little coding experience. And they now work as programmers, and they're some of the best in the industry because there arose a need for programmers and nobody was filling it. And it was super easy to just jump in and get a job as a programmer. And so my boss, actually, the person who hired me, was one of those people. That was how he got started. He was doing like just a menial job that really had nothing to do with programming, and he built a database. And then from that, he did consulting for someone. And then from that, he went to some Microsoft conferences. And then from that, he started working for this company. He built their customer base. He built their shopping cart system. And then they were like, hey, we want to bring you on full time. And that's how he got his job. And it was networking. It was just networking and that idea of, set a goal. Just do something you are passionate about. Do something that you really care about. Set that goal. Strive towards it. And definitely don't think that, the next person over or the person next to you is like, oh, they're doing better than me because, whatever it is. It's like, I'm sure that they're just as excited for your thing as you are for them. They're just as impressed with your specific, whatever it is that you're doing. I'm not an amazing C# developer, but I can, program in CSS. It's like, that's kind of an odd, thing, but it's like everybody has those little things where like that's their specialty. And what I want to point out to you guys is like I focused on CSS and I got a job because of it. And it took me a long time, and I would say there's a lot of things that a lot of mistakes that I made, life lessons from using CSS too much, in that I didn't reach out. But I would say that CSS definitely is has taught me a lot just because it showed me what not to do and what to do in how I took it. And every programming language is like that. It's like it can be your like your little place, your little like dominant corner, and it's like all you have to do is jump in and actually start learning. So all these animations are on my Twitter account. I posted them over the last week, and I think really the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway for me over all these years of programming in CSS and using it, in my job daily and learning how to, code in JavaScript, all of these lessons kind of amount to, one big lesson, which is keep coding curious. And what that means to me is don't think that you're going to get your specific area and you're just going to be good there. Like I've been doing this for 10 years. First of all, the industry changes. Like especially the web industry changes. Every 2 years, it's almost completely different. Like there's 5 new frameworks. There's however many whatever. Who knows? Who knows what's next? And if you're not curious about it, you'll lose the passion that you had for it at the beginning. And if you're not curious about it to begin with, if you don't allow yourself that curiosity to just make some mistakes, to go and have some trial and error, have some time where it's just you and the code, and you're just you don't even know what you're doing. You're just going. You're like looking on Stack Overflow. You're looking through every single book you can find. You're looking through to solve this one specific problem that means something to you. That's what curiosity is. It's like, what is this? How do I do this? It's like if you lose that, then you lose the passion for it. And so for me, even in my day-to-day life, it's like I try and challenge myself at least once a week to go and build something that I want to build. That has nothing to do with work. It has nothing to do with any projects that I'm working on. Nothing. It's just like, well, I wonder how you would build that. And my very first job was actually a programming job. I was a gameplay programmer. And I got that job because for about 4 years, I would code in the Unity 3D engine. I would just go and I'd build different things. One time I built an inventory script that was 30,000 lines of code. That's before I knew what arrays were. And then I learned what arrays were, and it shrunk down to 200 lines of code. But it's like I had to make that mistake to learn that thing, and it became so much more valuable to me. And I would have never learned what arrays were, barring somebody else telling me. But I would have never learned if I hadn't gone and made this huge thing and was super proud of it and really dug into how it worked. And then being able to be like, okay, well, here's the best way to do it. And, from what I've learned, and then just constantly be open to new ways to do it, and that's what a lot of programming nowadays is keep learning, keep learning the best way to do it. Consider yourself an expert, but when you become an expert. But then, keep learning, and keep the curiosity, because if you don't have that curiosity, learning won't mean anything besides like, oh, it's company training day, and that'll be it. Instead of, wow, I really am curious about this thing, and then that company training day comes, and you're like, oh, I've been wondering about this, and it'll be, it'll keep that passion for, okay, what's the next opportunity? What's the next job? For me, in that that gameplay programming job, there was a lot of things I didn't know. So I would take on something that I had really never worked on before, but because I had created all sorts of systems, I had created like third-person cameras, I had created like selecting systems, inventory systems, gravity systems, whatever it was. Like I'd done like a teeny bit of everything. That's why I'm saying like a jack of all, a jack of some code, because it's like, the more you touch, the more you're able to conquer, any one specific problem. Most programming is pretty similar. Like CSS actually is pretty similar to C#. There's even like classes. I mean, they're literally called the same thing. Like, and they actually function very similar. One is functional, one is very much like styling, but they're very similar. And so it's like, if you just keep touching every base, you keep just like digging into each section, and then you find that thing that you're really passionate about. You find that thing that you really like latch onto, and you're like, wow, that's actually amazing. So for some people it's VR, for some people it's video games, for some people it's websites, for some people it's SQL, like databases. They love managing databases. But it's like, you need to find that thing, in order to have that curiosity, because when you do find that thing and you're curious about it, that'll drive your career. And it's not going to be, however much training, for like job interviews. Like, that's really important. Do that. But be passionate about what you do first, and find the thing that you're passionate about first. And really, what I'm trying to say is, like, it's not that hard to be curious about it. We have the whole internet, and we have a ton of resources in our hands. Like, be a little bit uncomfortable. Make yourself a little bit uncomfortable and go try something you haven't even thought about before. Like for me, it was JavaScript. Like, I definitely thought about it, and then when I actually started doing it, I got a job doing that exact thing that I feared. I went from CSS to JavaScript, and then I combined them, and I was like, wow, I can do a lot with these two things. And it actually enhanced the ability that I already had, with CSS. It made it, that much more, it gave me so much more potential. So, yeah, that's all I have for you guys today, but I'm totally open to questions, and yeah, thanks for listening. Yes?
So you said maybe something you would have done differently is start learning JavaScript sooner.
Yes, definitely.
But I mean, obviously there's some issues that can be solved with CSS or JavaScript.
Yeah.
And so because you spent so long on CSS, you probably learned some solutions that could be solved with JavaScript and CSS.
Yes, definitely. I definitely learned how to use, create functional buttons in just CSS, which I was like, oh, that should be easy. And then I got into it, I was like, CSS was not created for this. But I figured out how to do it eventually. And that was actually after I had started working with JavaScript. I had worked with JavaScript for like 3 years before I did that. And the only reason I did that is because it was one of those week challenges that I do for myself. I was like, well, can I limit myself to, this specific thing? I think that's really important when you go to challenge yourself to something. Don't fall back on the thing you're comfortable with. There's a kind of saying that artists have that it's like with unlimited possibility, there's unlimited time to waste or something, or unlimited avenues to explore. It's like you'll never get anything done. That's kind of like the lesson of that. So I think to your question, like, yes, it's important to reach out and learn those things. But I think when you really want to learn something really specifically, like, that's for more exploring. But when you want to learn something specifically, just limit yourself to that thing. See what you can do with that specific. Whether it's a framework or it's how to connect something to a database. Like, don't fall back on something you're comfortable with. Push yourself to really explore that, and just explore that one thing that you set out to explore. Because as soon as you kind of like start giving yourself room to do other things, that's when you start getting like sidetracked and you kind of get into familiar territory. And I'm not saying don't ever go back over familiar territory. Like, definitely do, but challenge yourself to do something new. do it in a way you have never done it before, and limit yourself.
But do you think that, like, since you spent so long with CSS before
Yeah.
you moved over to JavaScript, which most people probably don't do,
Yeah.
do you think that probably benefited you in some way, like your style or your approach to solving problems?
I definitely use CSS. I think more than other developers. Where some people would solve problems with JavaScript in a more roundabout way, I would probably solve it, more directly with CSS. But I think, the opposite is true. Where because I have that bent towards CSS, and I started learning JavaScript later, I will do something different than a JavaScript developer would do. Like I will approach something in a different way, where I could do it much more directly with JavaScript. I'll do it indirectly with CSS, and that's not really, that's not to say they're just equal. Like they're not equal in very specific things. And it's like it's in the long run. It's like if you can accomplish it, and especially if you can learn both ways to do it, and you can like balance yourself out and be like, okay, I know a lot about this. Like for me, it's I know a lot about CSS. Now I work primarily with JavaScript. When I really want to challenge myself, I just work with JavaScript. So I definitely think I have a specific way of approaching it. It's kind of like you are the product of your experiences as far as like coding goes. So I definitely think that's true. Yeah, you make a good point. But I also think like any one person will kind of tend to do that, and that's okay. You'll have your specialty, and that's actually preferable to not knowing how to do it in a specific way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just thinking, since you have maybe a more unique approach, that maybe some companies might appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's definitely gotten me some recognition. Like even with the company I work with now, the senior developer above me, he'll hand off all UI stuff to me because he's like, that's just your thing. You started in UI, and even though I'm a full stack developer now, he hands most UI stuff to me just because I did start with CSS, and I'm strong in that area. So you'll definitely stand out, if you find that specialty and like pursue it. You'll stand out in that area.
I guess I have a question about your loading bars.
Yeah.
Were any of those done with the canvas?
No, none of them were done with Canvas. Those were all just pure, like CSS styles that I created myself.
Well,
Yeah,
cool.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. And then is there a simple way to explain how you get it to orient in like a circle like that, like the specifically that?
Okay, so
Yeah.
that one.
The one to the that.
That one. Oh wait, not that one. That one. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So this is actually okay. So there are two circle ones, and they're completely different. So this is the other circle one. This is actually this was actually done with borders and border coloring. So all I do is take one cell of the border, so like the left side, I have border radius, equal to whatever it would need to make it a circle, and then I just take each section of the border and I color it a certain, different color in each animation,
Okay.
and it looks like it's just a spinning circle, but really it's just the borders are curved and they're changing colors.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and then this other one, these are stationary dots. Whoa, that's too far. These are stationary dots, and the element that is their parent is the thing rotating, and they're actually just on a 0 to 100 loop, and there's 4 of them, and they're each on a delay, so it looks like they're stopping at the top, but that's just how animation. That's ease. The animation property ease does that automatically.
Ease. Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, because a linear animation would just be like, over and over and over, but I wanted to like feel like it, had some weight to it. So I was like, oh, just leave it with ease, and then rotate the whole the whole. It's actually the parent that's rotating, so I didn't have to move the child at all. I didn't have to figure out like where the child needed to be. I was just like, I'll just put the dot at the very top, give it 100 pixels, and then just rotate the parent.
Oh.
And so I don't have to figure out any fancy animation for like, that. I just rotate it 360 degrees and it comes out like this.
Cool.
With some delays, yeah.
Awesome.
You have a question?
So,
Yeah.
when you say this kind of thing took you 15 minutes,
Yeah.
is that because you had an idea in your head and you just sort of made it happen, or was there a lot of trial and error, or did you?
Kind of a little bit of both, like all of the above. So yeah, for some of these it was like for this one? No, yeah, this Microsoft loading bar. Obviously, I was inspired by Microsoft's loading bar, like the old XP loading bar, and in the series I had done this grass one. And this just is a bunch of different elements laid out, and their border radius is just I'm changing it so the point of the border radius goes down, and then it bends. So and then I'm just making all the other sides of the border. So it's actually one side of the border is the only thing that's showing on that whole element. So actually there are boxes. Those are each boxes, but I'm just hiding the other parts of them. So I took this and I turned it into this guy, and it was just a little bit of changing, because in that one it went from the right side to the left side, and in this one I just changed the delays so they were flipped. I added a box. I gave it a background color instead of a border color. That's why there's those little white spaces in between. And so it was just an iteration on the other one. And what I mean by it took me like 15 minutes is that like I knew, I had this idea in my head, and I kind of just looked around at what other code I had already created, and I was like, well, how can I, use those other systems? So I think this is 15 lines of HTML, and I think it's like 50 lines of CSS to create this. Yeah, so it was a little bit of a combination of like, well, how do I do it? And I did. I went through a little bit of a trial and error. At first, I wasn't even gonna have those little white spaces in, but when I created it and like put it into this format, it had those white spaces already. And I was like, well, that looks good. So here it is, and it's actually more accurate to the original. So yeah, so little things like that where like you just find out, part of the way through, you're like, oh, like for instance, there's actually a center element that has a white border around to give it the margin between. Because, yeah, so I added an element and I made a little bit of changes to the grass one, but really it's actually pretty similar to that grass one. It just goes in the opposite direction, and obviously it's changing the background transparency instead of making it bend in the wind. But like, yeah, it's really very similar, and you kind of just have to know what you're working with, and then work around it. Like I was saying with the borders on that spinning one, it was, I didn't think of that at first, but I was like, well, everything has a border, and I know I can make it a circle. I'm like, well, why don't I just use that? And so, that's what I used. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Would you say you approach your like regular workday in the same
Yeah,
kind of philosophy?
definitely. There's a little bit of freedom in our team. There's 3 of us who work in my team, and oftentimes we have to come up with solutions, kind of on the fly, where we're like, oh, we need to, either we need to fix something, or we need to create this new system, something specific that they want. And there's about 3 ways to approach like every problem. So the other day, actually, my boss was like, he was like, we need to do this thing. And I was like, I have no idea, like I just could not think of a way to do it. And he's like, man, there's only 2 ways that I can think of to do it. And I was like, what? How do you say 2 ways? Like, I don't see any ways. And then I like sat there for a little bit longer, and I was like, okay, let me actually consider what we have. And I found one of the ways that he had thought of. And his experience showed in that, in that sense that he had been working with that system for a lot longer than I have. I've really only been working with like, databases for like 10 months. And so what he saw in the database system, I just didn't see because I hadn't, purposely gone and, after that experience, I went and I, made my own website and I created my own PHP system that like dealt with databases, and I was like, I gotta figure this out. I gotta get more experience in this area, and so I went and did that because I ran into that problem. Where I was like, oh, I have no idea how I would even approach this, and so I purposely went and did that. But it's definitely like, there's definitely that creative approach where, I would say the bigger your team gets or the bigger the problem gets, the less you're able to come up with creative solutions for bigger things, but like really each individual piece is its own problem, and there is about 3 ways to accomplish like every individual piece. So you're never going to be like, oh, there's 50 ways to do this really exact thing that this company has given me. That's really it's super exact, like they want this many pixels between each thing, but when you break it down to each individual elements, there is about 3 ways to do everything. I mean, in my experience. So yeah, a lot of my approaches are just figuring out how I'm going to do it based off of my experience. So yeah. Yes.
I guess I have a question, like, for someone who's super comfortable with CSS and just like knows all about it, does something like a framework like Bootstrap or something like that, do you view that as like a crutch, like, or is it a helpful tool for you?
I use Bootstrap a lot actually, because it already has those, the general. It's very well built. It's very well thought through. Most frameworks like that are widely used are. I used to kind of view it as like, oh, if it's not custom, it's not good enough. But it's like really, somebody else has already invented the wheel. Don't try and reinvent it for the most part. For something like this, it's like, okay, obviously, this was a challenge to myself to learn. And so for that sort of thing, there was a really big system that we ended up using Foundation for at my job, and we had never used Foundation before, but I was the one who vouched for it because I was like, hey, this kind of already, accomplishes all of the, formatting needs that we have, and it's, well used, well documented, So I would definitely say, if you find something, that's, that already serves the purpose, that you need, it's like, okay, cool, that's something else you don't have to focus on, And I would say though, like, just like any programming language, every framework can be explored. Every framework can be pushed to the point where you find those things that are like, oh, that breaks in that way when I do this. So even when using those frameworks, I would say don't just do that with programming languages. Do it with frameworks. Do it with Bootstrap. Like try to break Bootstrap. Try to figure out like a use that's not in the documentation. Because that'll really teach you just as much as reading the documentation. That'll teach you how it really works or how it was put together. Yeah. Yeah.
You did mention game design a little bit. Have you built anything on the web, like JavaScript, HTML, CSS?
I did. I built a point-and-click adventure game with JavaScript when I first started using it. I don't think I've built much else with. Oh, I have some people that I mentor who I challenge them to build games, and then I help them build those games. But they're pretty basic stuff, just like keyboard movement, translated via JavaScript. So it's fun for sure. It's not really designed for that, but it is fun to figure it out and kind of build it from scratch like that. It's like building your own engine.
Yeah.
So which is difficult, but yeah.
How did you find your first mentor?
So my first mentor.
Or like, I guess when did you come to the realization that a mentor was way better than no?
Yeah, I think so. When I first started learning to code, that 9-year-old friend that I was talking about showed me how to code, and then it was about 4 years before we talked again about it, because I was like, oh, cool, she's off doing whatever, and like I'm just over here, coding, and like we don't really do very similar things. But when I reconnected with her, it was like she was excited about what the progress that I had made, and she wanted to share stuff with me. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I had never even thought about this. I've never heard of this thing, I've never tried these, whatever it is. And that's kind of when I realized, like, wow, having a mentor and even having peers is like who do the same thing, or similar things, or do slightly different things. People who to inspire you is like so much better than not having. And really, like, you can never be around too many programmers when like trying to kickstart your career. There's kind of this like idea that it's like, oh well, you just need to go off on your own and kind of become this like lone wolf. Especially like in game development, that happens a lot, where it's like you need to be an indie developer. It's like, well, if you have a team, it's like you're going to learn twice as fast because those people will have a different perspective. So I would say that happened probably about 4 years after I started learning to program. And I would say after that happened and I started connecting with different people, I wasn't very good at it for like 3 years even after that. I started connecting with different people, and my ability to learn things and ability to like retain things just grew, immensely, because I was able to ask questions to people instead of just like looking it up. Because the questions that I have were so specific, it would take me, 3 times as long to look it up on the internet than to just text somebody and be like, hey, how does this work? Message them and be like, what's going on? What is this? And that's usually how it started. It was like, I don't even know what this is. And they would just be like, hey, here's a video, or like they would just explain it to me. And even them sending me the videos, like, wow, I just saved so much time, Yeah. So it did take me a while, but I would say just put yourself in situations where you're having to code with other people. There's quite a few meetups in Portland that are just focused on like, hey, let's get together and share what we've learned. And those are amazing for connecting with people and building projects with other people. So, yeah.
Do you still attend those?
Pig Squad is the one that I do, yeah. I have gone to that a few times. For the most part, I have some Discord servers that I'm a part of, that I'm working like very specifically with people on their projects. And that's also another thing is, a lot of the time you'll have a project, but when working with other people, it's great to ask other people if you can join their project, because they'll have a challenge that you may have never even thought of, a system that you may have never even thought of to build. It'll push you out of your comfort zone a lot more than you being like, I'm going to push myself out of my comfort zone. It's like you only push yourself so far, and so it's like definitely put yourself out there and be like, hey, I'm ready for a challenge. What do you got for me? Hit me. So, yeah. But yeah, I do still attend some of those. For the most part, it's online friends and just connections and everything. That's how I got my first programming job as well. Just connecting with people online.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Kurtis.
Alright, thanks guys for coming in. Plenty of pizza, as always. A couple of groups, definitely check out Python Pirates. They meet here on Tuesdays, most Tuesdays, not this next Tuesday, but they will be here next Tuesday, the next Tuesday after that. And they do a lot of like coding challenges as a group, so definitely a good group to check out. It meets here. Otherwise, if you have any questions, talk to me or Rick. Feel free to fill out one of those surveys. We appreciate your feedback. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks for coming, guys.
That's awesome.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh yeah.